ever thought about moving to Mexico?
No, not once. Never in my life.
I'm thinking, Jazz and I were
just
entertaining
moving
the
to
idea
Mexico.
potentially moving to Mexico.
To flee the law or just for fun?
Well, I found out, I was looking at it. Mexico apparently, so number one, for North Americans, Mexico has like a really friendly like expatriate sort of community / program. So if you just go to Mexico like for vacation, you go in, they give you like right as you enter 180 days to be there. That's 6 months. And all you have to do at the end of 6 months is leave and come back. And then it's another 180 days.
Just resets the clock.
It just resets the clock. Now, there are certain, like, you know, stipulations and shit in there around, like, how to rent, what you can rent, what you can own, like, how you work, a lot of that kind of stuff. But what I was looking at is the average rent in Mexico City, which Mexico City is, like, it's the largest city in the Western Hemisphere, right? More populous than New York, LA, anywhere like that.
Wait, really? I didn't know that.
That's fucking wild.
Yeah, that's a fact. And so it's multicultural. And there alone, you would be paying like for like a like mid-tier apartment, $1,000 a month, right? Total overall expenses living in Mexico, groceries, internet, phone, all that shit, $1,500. And so you get all of that. Now, there is issue working. However, if you do like freelance work or anything of that matter, you can get paid that way. You don't like, if you can move with a company, that's great. Like the company, a lot of people do like remote work. And if the company is based in part in Mexico, then you can just seamlessly do that. But you could also just like, I could go and I could work on film sets or TV shows or this, that. You could write if you just have some money, all taken care of. And, you know, Jasmine's writing her book right now. And I was just thinking like, what if we just went to Mexico? Like, we just went, got it, like stayed at like an Airbnb for 2 weeks while we looked for something semi more permanent than that. And then we just like live there on our savings right now, and we're trying to make a little bit more. Yeah, you just stayed for up to 6 months. I was thinking like 3 months,
the whole time,
up to 6 months. Yeah, and I was all like, I think it could be fucking rad.
I think you're doing all this as damage control for your racist Mexican doll. You're like, how can I be canceled now? I'm literally Mexican now.
I'm living in Mexico. You can't tell the difference between me and your generic Mexican.
I'm one of the hombres now.
No, it got more racist.
No, it's okay because he's speaking their language.
Yo soy hombre con tu.
See?
Like you?
Yeah,
no, I think that's with.
Like you would be like.
I don't know Spanish. No.
With is con.
Is,
with is con.
No,
I don't know what
right.
like would be. I took 4 years of Spanish and I remember shit.
No, that's French.
I took 2 years.
Here's my
literally
problem.
all the Spanish I know comes from menus. Like knowing that con means with is I'm like, yeah, chili con queso.
I did, because in high school I did 3 years of Spanish, and then in college I did 3 years of French. And so I don't know either.
They cancel each other
so
out.
The wires get crossed
I did
all
the same
time.
thing.
Like I'll be talking. Oh, really?
I did 2 years of Spanish and 1 year of French right after. And I remember because in Spanish, black is negro, right? But it's noir in French. But I would constantly get that mixed up. And so I would keep saying negro in French class, which maybe doesn't have
noir.
the best connotation if you don't have the connection of, wait, no, I literally thought I was just saying the word black. Welcome to Of Mics and Memory Cards, a complete rundown of the PlayStation 1 game library, all 4,105 of them. My name is Maximilian Pegasus, but my friends call me Tyler. Today I'm joined by...
My name's Jacob of the Millennium Pyramid.
My name is Kameron, and I summon the Pot of Greed that allows me to draw 3 additional cards to my deck.
Today we're talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories. A seminal classic of the early 2000s era, a simpler time, right after 9/11, which we'll actually get into later. Who has history with the Yu-Gi-Oh! Series?
I do. This is a really hard one to say I have history with the series. Yu-Gi-Oh! Was really taking off on the playground at elementary school as I was transitioning into middle school. Now, I come from a place, as you guys I think probably also do, where elementary school extended all the way through 6th grade, and middle school was just 7th and 8th. Oh, no? Okay, well.
Mine was 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, a lot of people get that.
Yu-Gi-Oh! For me was the first year of middle school.
Got it. Well, I remember seeing, because it was, I was a big Digimon card collector, Pokemon card collector, and so when Yu-Gi-Oh! Started to usurp it, it was all like, what the fuck is this? Fuck that game. I hate this. And then in middle school, I remember seeing there were a bunch of just nerds hanging out in the courtyard by the vending machines playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And I thought, these guys are fucking weird. And I remember one of them, shout out Michael Robotham, who ended up going to South Medford Middle School when I went to North Medford. And I was kind of a dick to that guy. And then we crossed paths because I think he did theater as well. And we bumped into each other in like high school at like one of the thespian conferences. And I was all like, yo, you're Michael. And he's all like, yeah, you're Jacob. And it's like, dude, good to see you. He's like, good to see you. I'm like, really? Because
yeah, he wasn't like, hey, fuck you.
And yeah, dude turned the other cheek. Good for him.
He was like, I always thought you were a loser for playing Digimon. I just have to point out the irony of you being like, look at those fucking nerds as you go back to your Digimon cards in plastic labeled in numerical order.
Oh yeah, just way too much money spent on making sure that like the first 4 I remember in one of those packs were the I forget what they were called, but it was like the 4 baddies at the end of the Digimon games, or the Digimon
the Dark
series.
Masters.
It was Piedmon, the Dark Masters, Piedmon, Puppetmon, Machine Dramon, and Metal Seed Dramon. So yeah. Fucking nerd me. And then later on, when we were in college, this was something that Kameron was definitely a part of, is in my dorm room, which was like a big old tower, basically. Green Springs is what I think it was called. There was always someone who would... just randomly, there'd be Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards laid about in like the outdoor stairwell. And we referred to this mysterious person as the Yu-Gi-Oh! Ninja, because we had no idea who they were, but it was somebody who left Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. Yeah,
holy
in Green
shit!
Springs.
I forgot about
cards,
that.
or there were just cards.
It was always different
out?
Cards.
What?
Yeah, it was always, and I remember because we were on the hunt for the Blue Eyes White Dragon,
of course,
because that's the only thing that we actually really knew from Yu-Gi-Oh! So Yu-Gi-Oh! Has, yes, been a presence in my life for like 2 decades, but I've never really engaged with it.
It's tangential.
And spoiler alert, after playing this game, I do not want to.
I think I got similar feelings. Yeah, so first I need to correct myself from earlier. It's not the Jar of Greed that allows you to draw 3 additional cards from your deck to your hand. It's the Pot of Greed, but it doesn't allow you to draw 3. It allows you to draw 2. So I was wrong in every sense of the word. But despite that, I've enjoyed Yu-Gi-Oh! From I think the same time you guys. I think I was also in middle school, but I'm a little bit older than you guys. So I don't know if I I don't know what part of it I got into first, the card game or the anime or anything like that. But I remember collecting the cards, trying to play the card game with friends, and by that I mean we just played according to according to how we saw it played on the show, which is not recommended. So we honestly just played for fun, and I was younger, and I thought those were the rules. We didn't bother to look it up or read it anywhere until I got to high school and met up with another group of friends who actually also played, but they played more seriously. So when I started playing with them, I would, make a move and they'd be like, you can't do that. And I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, you can't fucking do that. And I'm like, but the show, and they're like, no, please God, no. So my world was turned upside down with that, and I kind of stopped playing the card game because it's way more complicated than we made it out to be. I liked it better when we were just playing for fun. But I watched the anime, just the first season with Yugi and Atem, all that stuff. I didn't do like Yu-Gi-Oh! GX or any of the stuff after that. But yeah, I I liked Yu-Gi-Oh. It was a lot of fun.
You should have been like, sorry guys, I'm using the Forbidden Memories rule set, so actually I'm way deeper into Yu-Gi-Oh than you.
And by the way, here I've summoned all the parts of Exodia. Fuck you.
Obliterate! And then screaming. I might actually have the most experience with Yu-Gi-Oh then, though I still wouldn't call myself like a huge fan. I did really like the anime when it was airing. As I was thinking back, it was kind of my first quote-unquote shonen anime.
Nice.
That, believe in yourself, believe in your friends, believe in the heart of the cards. Something about that really spoke to me, to the point that one time I was watching one of the later episodes, I think, when Yugi is fighting Maximilian Pegasus over at my grandparents' house on Thanksgiving, and I remember being so upset that lunch or dinner or whatever was starting, because it meant I had to miss the end of the Yu-Gi-Oh episode. And I was like, I'll be right there, guys. I just need to go know what's going on. And they were like, it's just a cartoon. They're going to rerun it. And I was like, you don't understand serial storytelling. And to this day, I don't know that I continued watching past, because I didn't, want to just watch the recap on the next episode. I needed to see the beat-by-beat breakdowns of why one card interacted with another card, and why that card then interacted with a card that someone had played 3 episodes in the past. I really did enjoy it quite
They
a bit.
broke the momentum. You were just like, I'm out. I'm out of it now. I realized I was watching a show.
You ruined it, Grandpa. I don't want to spend time with my family. I want to watch anime. And that trend would continue into my adulthood. I did have the card game, and I wouldn't say that I played it with any sort of regularity. The folks I played it with were people I didn't like very much. It was right when I got to middle school, and you get to a new school, you're trying to kind of establish your new group, and the way our middle school was broken down is there were 3 halls. There was A hall, B hall, C hall. I was in B, and all of my friends got put in either A or C, and so I just had to make do with the other fucking weirdos in B hall. And one of the common bindings was playing the Yu-Gi-Oh card game, and there was this kid, Kurt. I don't remember his last name, or I would publicly shame him and call him out for his crimes. He would occasionally look through my deck. He'd be like, I know Yu-Gi-Oh really well. Let me look through your cards. And I know he would steal from it. I know he would pocket cards when I wasn't looking, because my Blue Eyes White Dragon was missing one day.
That asshole.
And there's no way I would misplace that card. So, Kurt, wherever you are, give me back my fucking Blue Eyes White Dragon.
He's the real life Seto Kaiba. That asshole stole your Blue Eyes White Dragon.
He also stole my grandpa's soul and sealed it in a VHS tape or something. But I'm more mad about the card. And has anyone played any other Yu-Gi-Oh video games, or is this all of our first experience with one?
I think I played one on the Game Boy Advance. I'm not sure which one that is. And then I did the most recent one that came out for like PC. That like the free to play one.
I have that on my cell phone, and I tried to play it to like figure out what the real rule set, which I don't remember very well, was compared to the Forbidden Memories one, and I made it like a bit into the tutorial and got kind of bored. It's a lot. It was a lot to focus on. Well, without further ado, I think then let's dive into the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! And specifically Forbidden Memories. Sounds good?
Sounds amazing.
Now, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is one of the biggest franchises in the world. The 63rd top grossing, in fact, just under Sonic the Hedgehog, and just above, of all fucking things, Mamma Mia.
Here we go again.
There it is, boys. And it is a media franchise in every sense of the word, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Means very different things to many different people. For me, it sparks mostly a nostalgia for the anime series in my childhood, but for others, it represents primarily a card game that was, at one point at least, the highest-selling card game of all time. For others still, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a video game series, representational of various board and card games that are unique in rule sets from both their analog and anime or manga counterparts. And the first among these to the US market was Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories. And I'm going to self-correct myself already. It was the first console game. The Game Boy Color game came out 2 days prior. I'm sorry, everyone. I caught it. However, Forbidden Memories came out in the US in March of 2002, but Yu-Gi-Oh! The series began in Japan all the way back in 1996. So we've got more ground to cover, boys. A lot of ground. Filled with not only cards, but dice, capsules, fucking chess or something, and the ever-present power of friendship and the heart of the cards. Whenever I look down at, cards, if I'm playing poker or something, before I draw one, I think of the two of you. And I think, what would my friends want the next card to be? Yes! The King of Spades.
We're all just going to draw like a shared happy face on the back of our hands like they do in Yu-Gi-Oh! And we'll think about each other every single time.
We should all get cool matching power gauntlets that slot in dice or gems or whatever.
Holy shit, each one of us should be one of the 3 Egyptian god cards. Like, we should fucking call that shit right now.
I am so thankful that we never got tattoos together back when we lived with one another.
Yu-Gi-Oh! Began as a manga written and drawn by Kazuo Takahashi, known professionally as Kazuki Takahashi. Takahashi was born October 4th, 1961, a sickly child interested in art from a young age. And when you think of the stereotype of the young artist who gets mocked by their teachers for a lack of standardized knowledge, you might as well include Takahashi's picture next to that encyclopedia entry. He was mocked relentlessly by his homeroom teacher, who said, and we quote,
"Takahashi is the poop machine that knows nothing except eating, sleeping, and pooping."
That's the life right there, though.
Yeah.
I just want to lay on a beach somewhere in Bermuda doing nothing but eating, sleeping, and pooping, all in the same hammock. When I saw that quote, I immediately sent it to the two of you because It was just like, I can't believe the audacity of this teacher.
I can imagine that guy just like walking through like the bookstore or like the manga section or something like that and seeing Takahashi's name on like just an entire shelf full of Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga and be like, really? The poop guy? The poop machine? Or maybe the teacher himself sees it and it's like, no fucking way. The poop machine wrote and drew all this? Actually, I don't know if he drew it.
Thinking in like Japan, like you can imagine like an old Japanese professor opening up the book and being all like, yep. Yeah, this looks like the poop machine's writing. Just shakes his head in shame.
Anime was a mistake.
I like to think the teacher looked at it and went, all right, I did it. This is because I called him the poop machine. I was just trying to motivate his art. I needed to give him an antagonist. He's like fucking Ozymandias in Watchmen. He's like, I will have to create the villain so everyone else can succeed.
Spoilers for Watchmen.
Because to be fair... Oh, yeah, sorry, whatever. Actually, in the film version of Watchmen, it's just a big Dr. Manhattan that comes. I hate that.
That movie's awful. What a way to miss the mark entirely.
If that teacher had not said that to Takahashi, then he might never have been incensed enough to draw manga. So we, at Of Mike's and Memory Card, officially say, thank you, horrible teacher from the 1970s, for calling a child a poop machine. That's our official stance. Put that at the top of the Kotaku article. We're going to skip ahead a bit, because to be honest, the man was unsuccessful for a stretch of about 15 years. His first one-shot was published in Weekly Shonen Jump in 1981, but he self-describes almost all of his work before Yu-Gi-Oh! As, quote, a total flop. But interestingly, in the planning stages, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was intended as a horror manga, something you can still see a bit in some of the monster designs, as well as the occasional darker moment. Duels are often battles that contain a legitimate threat to the bodily autonomy or the safety of the participants. But what's funny is that in the manga, the card game was not the original focus. While the manga revolves entirely around various games, Duel Monsters, the card game, isn't really given central importance until a little over a year into the manga's publishing in Shonen Jump magazine.
I never would have thought that. I thought that the entire conceit of Yu-Gi-Oh! Was the cards, but I guess I would based on my experience with it.
Not until later. And like some of the games in like those first few volumes is just like one of them is like it's like a random it's a card game, but just like with the regular deck of cards where you have to like draw numbers, and Yugi, or I guess it's Atem at the time, but like Yugi and the person he's challenging, every number that you pull will either like lower you or make you go higher. They're like hanging from some kind of like chain thing, and the lower you get, I think the closer to death you are. I wish I actually could. We can cut all this. Actually, cut all this. I don't know what point I'm making.
I would love this. Sounds like Yu-Gi-Oh was Squid Game before Squid Game.
Like a one-on-one Squid Game.
You're not necessarily wrong. I think what I like about Takahashi is that he just had a legitimate love of game, like games as a concept, not like video games necessarily, or not just card games, but just the kind of idea of creating rule sets and things that play really well off of one another, and thinking about the complexities of that, and then the dramatization of a game. Like, there's always that sort of blown up idea when you're watching either the anime or the manga, and you see these big monsters come out of the cards, and there's this visual representation. And so it gives this sense of scale to what is in reality just two people sitting at a table flipping cards over. And I think that's interesting because sometimes when you are playing like a round of poker or even Go Fish, there's that internal monologue of, oh my God, if I do this, then they're going to do this. Like, you create that drama sort of within yourself. And I think that's what Takahashi connected with, was the feeling that you get when you're playing something, and then finding the way to represent that visually through the manga, and then creating his own games that don't need to be fleshed out all the way or ever created, fully developed into a game that people are actually going to play. He can kind of make up the rules as he's writing the anime, which it's fun. It just sounds kind of fun.
Yeah, I mean, and it presents like a challenge for himself as a writer. Like, he's creating all these sets of conditions to put the protagonist into a corner, and then he has to write his way out of it in order for the protagonist to triumph. And it reminds me of, I feel like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure does the same thing, for those who've watched it, because especially when you get to the parts where all the characters have stands, some of their powers are so fucking ridiculously overpowered, and you're like, how the hell are they gonna fucking defeat this guy? And then they pull some bullshit out of their ass, but it's still fucking engaging. And Yu-Gi-Oh sort of feels like that, especially when you get to the card game, because Yugi will also just make up it feels like he just makes up some bullshit rule on the spot, like the multiple Kuriboh episode where all he had was the Kuriboh, and he just like multiplied it to like, I don't know, fucking hundreds of them, and it overpowered his opponent's monsters, which was dope.
I always get kind of irritated whenever I talk to somebody. And this is, I think, it's like an infectious disease that spreads across fandom and mistakes itself as, so the example I'm going to offer here is when people criticize the lore in something and use that to be like a critique of it. Let's say it's the lore in a movie, and then they use it to be all like, well, now it's a bad movie. And I'm all like, actually, no, it's completely different. It's so utterly disconnected. And I think people often, I'm going to use Star Wars as an example. People might come out and say, oh, Rey is a awful character because she would just have these powers come out of nowhere, and that never happened in the lore. It's not possible. Therefore, it's bad. And I'm like, I'm not arguing that it's bad. I don't think it's good. But the issue isn't that like this, that they're kind of making up rules as they go along. That would be totally okay if the underpinning story was interesting at all. And if any of this maybe was symbolic of something else. And I really don't mind the idea of a creators being all like, I really like these characters and I don't really know exactly what to do, so fuck it, they get to do this thing now. But we have like a baseline quality story undergirding it all, so it doesn't really matter, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think a lot of shonen anime, the hype moment is always when the underdog pulls strength out of nowhere, and maybe that falls within the rule sets, or maybe it's specifically breaking the established rule set. But I think it's the build-up that matters, that build-up of how is this character going to get out of this situation. Yes. And as long as it's told in a way that's at least somewhat believable, I think there's good ways to reveal it and bad ways to reveal it. And I think people mistake a lot of what happens in Star Wars as being bad because it's undoing the lore or because it's contradictory to something else in this 40-year-old multiple people having hands on it kind of work. Whereas the issue with Star Wars is just bad storytelling and bad moment-to-moment beats and characters that aren't interesting. And we're talking specifically about 7, 8, 9. I think there's bad stuff in the other Star Wars as well, but just before people bandwagon on us too hard. But those newer ones, it's the problem is the buildup and an inconsistency in writers, especially when you look at like the jump from 7 to 8 to 9. They're so obviously written by different collectives of people in response to different wants of the fandom. And what I like about a lot of manga and anime is that I don't feel like they always cave to what is like quote unquote the right choice or what the fans are demanding. Like if Attack on Titan caved to what the fans wanted, that show would be utter trash.
Oh yeah,
because the creator had a singular vision, and I don't know what me and my wife always argue about, or not argue but talk about, is how much of that anime and manga was planned ahead of time. Like how far in the future, how much of the crazy shit that goes on that wouldn't be revealed for years and years did the writer know about in the first place?
I feel like so much of it he had to have planned ahead. It's insane. There's just so much detail and so many layers into the shit that unfolds. The more of Attack on Titan you read and watch, he had to have planned it all ahead of time.
I found a very thorough Reddit post on the Yu-Gi-Oh subreddit detailing the timeline of the card game's introduction, and to be honest, even after that, I don't fully follow how it was integrated and how it became the central focus. But essentially, with Yu-Gi-Oh, the franchise, there are 4 timelines. There's the manga, which developed the card game into full importance possibly as a response to dwindling sales, but that's alleged. There's the anime, which has a Season 0 that was not released in the US, produced by Toei, that barely includes the card game. There's the actual physical cards, which also had an earlier incarnation made by Bandai, with little resemblance to the current card variations, and they seem pretty poorly designed. And then there's video games, which also had an initial PlayStation game completely removed from cards at all, called Yu-Gi-Oh! Monster Capsule Breed and Battle, which I suppose if we're covering every PS1 game, we will eventually cover. But this seems more like a strategy RPG a la Final Fantasy Tactics, but with a monster breeding aspect. So Pokemon meets Tactics Ogre, as it were.
Sounds dope.
This was first released in 1998, published by Konami. Konami would then become synonymous with Yu-Gi-Oh! The brand, and would also inherit the physical card game as well in February 1999. Konami then went on to release a pair of Yu-Gi-Oh! Games for the Game Boy/Game Boy Color in 98 and 99 respectively, which means that they were working on the video games prior to the release of the physical card game, which further means that the rules between the two are not identical. The virtual game rule sets are then the ones that carry over into Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories, released originally on the PlayStation in Japan in December of 1999. This means it was released prior to the adaptation of the Duel Monsters anime in Japan, which came out starting April 2000, produced by Studio Gallop. We got it?
Actually, can you go back a little? I don't think I missed a few things.
I'll read the whole thing over again.
That's freaking wild. I feel like this might have been the start of Konami's mindset being like, you know what? We can make so much more money if we don't focus on video games. Like seeing how successful they were when they invested in like the physical card game and like all this other stuff, and then they're like, you know what else makes so much fucking money? Pachinko. Let's start deviating and focusing on that.
So you're saying by like 2028 we're gonna get the Yu-Gi-Oh! Pachinko game presented by
I'm pretty sure
Konami?
That already exists.
It's gotta exist already. The only thing that I can think is, since Yu-Gi-Oh! Is kind of a kid's property, it might not, since it's sort of gambling.
Ooh, unless we can potentially get a gritty reboot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Something a little bit more adult, like Digimon Adventure Tri. If we just got Yu-Gi-Oh! Adventure Tri.
There is not a Yu-Gi-Oh! Pachinko game that I can find.
Wow.
That is genuinely surprising. And you'd also think that maybe Pachinko would feature into the manga or the anime at some point.
Well, have you watched every episode of Yu-Gi-Oh? You don't know.
I haven't watched every episode, nor will I.
You know what show that came out in America that did have a pachinko episode? Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, baby, season 2.
Really?
Yeah. Ernie, the guy who runs the juice shop, yeah, he gets a pachinko machine and puts it in their I can't remember the juice bar that they all hang out in, and Rocky gets super hell addicted to it because it's actually I think a cursed pachinko machine that Lord Zed puts in there, and then the pachinko machine turns into the monster they fight. So I'm guessing, and it just feels so out of place that like somebody brings in a random pachinko machine into their hangout spot, and I think it's because, you know, they couldn't not use the footage for an episode. Like, they needed to make an episode for something, and they're like, well, how else are we gonna explain a pachinko machine monster? Let's just bring in a pachinko machine.
That's amazing.
Maybe none of my tirade earlier there is important to me or to anybody else, but what it means is that depending on what you're playing, the rules of the card game never actually line up to anything concrete, because the rules of Forbidden Memories don't line up to the card game or even really the anime. And the card game in the show and in the manga, seems like the rules were always being made up as they go. So the only really, really consistent rule set are the physical cards that none of us play anymore. So we can't detail the rule set that elaborately either. Now, Forbidden Memories was not released in Western territories until March of 2002, a few months after the translated anime began airing here, which was in September of 2001, a mere 3 weeks after 9/11. And if you want my theory on why this series got popular over here, I think we were desperate to get our minds off the Twin Towers through the heart of the cards and the power of friendship.
I forgot that this would tie back into 9/11.
Oh my god.
Are you telling me you forgot about 9/11?
Oh,
that's the one rule.
I never forget.
Never forget. And this is also sort of a theory, but in the space of time between the first game we got and the first game that Japan got, there were another 6 more Yu-Gi-Oh games. And I think that Konami's American publishing arm smelled money and quickly translated Forbidden Memories, even though the game was a little wonky and outdated mechanically at this point.
It absolutely shows and plays that way.
Yeah, no kidding.
I was so nervous that this was going to be another episode, because for the past 2, I've been a little self-conscious, being like, I didn't really enjoy either of these that much, and both of you did. I'm glad that we can all say this game kind of sucks.
This game more than kind of sucks. This game's awful.
It's pretty overtly the worst thing we've
by far.
Okay, we've got that off our chest now.
Cool.
This game fucking blows. All right. But what's weird here is that are the children, or is it, wait, what's the Skinner quote?
Am I out of touch?
Am I so out of touch? No, it's the children who are wrong, because the gambit in releasing this game worked. Forbidden Memories sold okay in its home country. It sold 500,000 copies, which actually pales in comparison to the Game Boy games, which each sold about 3 times that. Oh. However, Forbidden Memories sold 2 million copies across the USA and Europe, winding up the 33rd best-selling game for the PS1 overall. Being the West's first console Yu-Gi-Oh game, kids were desperate to play the card game that they'd been watching for a few months, and so it just flew off the
33rd? That's... So many games deserve that spot over this one. It is kind of crazy to me to think, like, so that means back in the day, in the early 2000s, the beginning of the 21st century, kids rushed home so that way they could sit in front of their TV and play a simulated card game. I'm not usually the person to defend smartphones and that kind of on-the-go technology, but this is the exact... Your time is more valuable than Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories. And so if you're playing this on the bus or on the train or at the stoplight ever so briefly on your phone, I don't mind it. But if you're rushing home to play it, human life is worth more than that.
Can I just pulled the list up. Can I list off some of the games that Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories outsold on the PlayStation 1? Some
Go
that
ahead.
absolutely should have taken this spot, or maybe
Let's
even
get
be
mad.
higher. Yeah, so what Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories sold more than, immediately under it was Dino Crisis. That's a fucking crime. Final Fantasy Tactics was at number 37. Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 is number 40. Silent Hill, a game we have covered previously, is 43. Parasite Eve is 45. What else have we got here? Twisted Metal 2 is 53. The original Tekken is 54. Parappa the Rapper is 57. Ark the Lad was 60. Let's see what else. What's some other standouts? At least for our sakes, Twisted Metal 3 was 79. Dragon Quest 4, Dragon Quest was 83.
That's surprising.
Actually, maybe not so much for Tyler, but Xenogears was 88. and
Xenogears rules. Shut up.
Xenogears sold that much? That's surprising.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty much it for the standout titles, but that's fucking crazy.
Fucking 33rd over. Oh my god.
So many of those other games that probably deserved it more.
Which, I mean, I think that's kind of the reason that we're covering this one so early. And this was an early suggestion from, I think, you, Jacob, because that box was ubiquitous. I remember seeing it everywhere.
This was actually this is technically our first request, because I did talk about the podcast before we were really up and running, and one of my friends was all like, "Oh, you should do Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories," and I was like, "Yeah, fuck it, sure."
This has got to be one of those licensed games that so many people played as a kid and have really fond memories of, and I think we should put the disclaimer out that if this is your favorite game and you love the mechanics,
then you have awful taste,
okay.
and you should feel ashamed of yourself.
We are not invalidating your experience.
Jacob might be, but
Cameron, you're the tiebreaker. You have to make a choice. Are people correct or are they wrong to like it?
I'm gonna say. Oh God, there's so much pressure now. They are not.
Oh, what's that, Cameron? You're cutting out. Oh, sorry, folks, we lost him. He gave an answer, but we'll never hear it.
Radical centrism. Thanks, Joe Biden.
It's worth noting that the card game was released in the US the same month as Forbidden Memories, the video game. So even if the rules were different, kids who only bought one or the other probably had no fucking idea that any of this was different than anything else. Yu-Gi-Oh! Was essentially a four-armed monster with none of the arms actually being operated by the same head at this point.
This is something that I think is kind of interesting. I don't want this to be too much of a sidetrack, but you know when you guys work a job and you have to learn a new software or new program that is only useful at that job. Like, it does you no good to like write on your resume, I know how to use this program because nothing else uses it. And so it kind of feels like, why is this clogging up the limited brain space that I have? And the rules to Yu-Gi-Oh! Kind of feel like that. And the fact that the game doesn't play the same across all these different mediums means, like, if I was a Yu-Gi-Oh! Kid and I'd learned the card game and I was really excited to go into the video game only to discover that the rules weren't the same and I had to learn it anew, but then the game doesn't help you at all to learn how to play it, I would be... that's the equivalent. So I guess if you're really good at Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories, then you're probably working a job where you learned a completely useless skill outside of that particular employment opportunity.
You can't really be good at the game. You either get lucky or you don't. And that's most of Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories, is just praying to RNGesus to come down. And for Easter Sunday, my wish is RNGesus to bless me in my next playthrough of Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories. So it's also worth noting that Yu-Gi-Oh! Was a huge success in the US pretty much immediately upon its release, potentially owing to that very multi-pronged transmedia attack that I described. The TV series debuted on Kids WB and was distributed by 4Kids. 4Kids has a bit of a reputation for doing, let's call them loose translations, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Was hit just the same. outside of the requisite changes in names, theme songs, I will say I think we got the better theme song. I listened to the Japanese version. It's kind of generic, like Egyptian themed, but ours, I played it for my wife the first time today, or it was the first time she had heard it. And when there's that drop where he goes, "It's time to duel," Kat went like, "Whoa," and like put a hand to just under her neck and was like, "My goodness."
And that's when she turned to Tyler and said, "I'm sorry, are we about to get lucky or not?"
When I'm in the mood, I come home and just bring out the stereo, light some candles, and play the Yu-Gi-Oh theme song.
And then you put yourself face down in attack position.
For the translation, outside of the requisite changes in names, theme songs, and English dubbed characters being given inexplicable Brooklyn accents, there were also larger changes as well. In fact, the concept of being sent to the Shadow Realm that has become so ubiquitous with the dub is a stand-in for what the actual translation would be, which is just characters fucking dying. No one gets banished to the Shadow Realm. They just get fucking killed. There were other changes unrelated to cultural censorship. The cards in the show actually had to be altered slightly because of the nature of Konami also selling the physical card game. This was done because in the US, if they matched exactly the merchandise, the show would technically be considered an infomercial and then be subject to much higher fees. So if you notice the difference between the artwork on the cards they play in the game and the cards in real life, that's the reason that was done, was so that it wouldn't just be a 22-minute advertisement, which all ties back to the 80s and Transformers and all of the
No way.
You know, it's a bigger thing than we have time to cover. But yeah, I was really surprised to find that out. And I can't find exact viewership numbers, but I can tell you that the card game was huge, selling $17 million worth of cards in just a few months, and that's in the US alone. Konami would then pair up with McDonald's to create promotional cards prior to McDonald's doing so with even Pokemon. 4Kids actually produced a feature-length film in collaboration with the anime studio Gallop, specifically for the USA, released by fucking Warner Brothers. And the film was, of course, a critical and financial flop, but it goes to show that Yu-Gi-Oh! Quickly became one of the Japanese import tentpoles in the US, so video games were an obvious step to media dominance. Now, why I think the game was translated as a way to make money on the cheap is squarely because of its age. The US release came 2 years after the release of the PS2, and 3 years after the original Japanese release. There would have actually already been a PS2 title that they could have just translated at that point, and to be honest, it had probably already been greenlit, but I feel like this one got shoved in the oven to bake it quick. It was released in the US 2 days after the Game Boy Color USA release called Dark Duel Stories, which is another one that uses this old video game rule set.
And to note, this is a game that came out on March 19th, 2002. So, let's take a moment and let's think about what movie topped the North American box office that weekend. And I want to give you guys a hint here. If Yu-Gi-Oh! As a franchise was quickly becoming defined as for its ability to whip out release after release, fairly shoddily made in order to make as much money as possible based on cultural recognition, the movie that topped the box office this weekend was the first in a line of many that I would argue has earned a very similar reputation.
Fellowship of the Ring?
You dick. And it's animated.
Oh, when you say okay, not
okay.
in the instance that it was shoddily made. I was just thinking more like how it was released back, like filmed at the same time and released pretty much back to back.
Got it. Okay,
I love Lord of the Rings. Let's clarify that right now.
And it's animated? Shrek 2?
You're on the right track there. Ice Age.
Oh.
I actually saw Ice Age in theaters.
I did too.
And when we were seeing it, the film reel caught on fire and we had to be ushered out. So I never saw the end of Ice Age.
Oh man, you didn't get to see the meteor hit. I'm just kidding.
It did.
Actually, I guess the Ice Age came after that. So I guess my understanding of geologic history is not very strong at all. It's not rock solid.
As we sort out Jacob's geological history, we're going to do some Wikipedia deep dives on the meteor and the Ice Age movies. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. All right, let's finally circle back to the game itself. And to be perfectly frank, the reason I spent so much time talking around the game is I know very little about the formal development on this one. It was directed by Morikuni Kubo, who also crafted the, quote, thought logic design with Hidehiro Hirata. This is their first name credit on any game, though it doesn't necessarily mean it was their first work, period. Previous to this was the era, that weird time where developers were often just credited under random monikers, as we discussed in the Dead or Alive episode. So my assumption is that 1999 is just around when Konami decided to start, actually crediting their workers. That said, I don't know what they would have been doing before this game specifically. And that still carries over to this era a little bit because the program direction is credited to just Gun. Gun in all caps. Separate than that, I'm also unable to find the credits on that first PS1 game, the Tactics Ogre Capsule Monsters one, meaning that they could be involved in that first title. Again, I'm not really sure. I can find credits on the first Game Boy games, the ones that use the similar rule set to this one. The card design is credited to Nobuhiro Yamada and Takuri Chida in Forbidden Memories, both of whom are also credited as programmers in the first Game Boy title. So it's possible that they developed the rules for that one and then were just credited for creating the rule set in Forbidden Memories, or they might have been involved in this game at all. Y'all, I don't know. And I don't know that anyone at Konami really cares enough to, go too deep. There wasn't a PlayStation Underground demo disc or after-the-fact documentary a la Kaz. We just don't have those kinds of archival recordings or developer blogs or what have you. But all of these people would go on to develop exclusively Yu-Gi-Oh! Titles up through the next console generation, with most of them tapping out around the middle of the PS2 GameCube generation. Because it's so hard to find details on them, I couldn't tell you if they left the industry entirely or were promoted internally in Konami to managerial or financial positions. The team all seemed to work really close together for about 8 years and then dissolved as a separate team came in and then picked up the anime game adaptation torch. And despite the massive sales in the West, Forbidden Memories was not received well critically, landing in the 50s and low 60s from most outlets, which I think is being generous. But let's talk about the game itself and see how we all feel it holds up. It doesn't. It's quite bad.
I think we established it doesn't.
I don't think it ever did. This game was born without legs.
So I guess we should go over the difference between the rule set here and the rule set of the card game a bit. And again, we don't know super detailed the card game rules, but in this one, you're given a deck of 40 cards. There's 5 in your hand at any given time, and you start with 8,000 life points. The playfield has 4 rows of 5, 2 rows per person. So you've got a row where you can put monsters and a row where you can put magic and trap cards. You can put out any monster at any point, but I think the big mechanic here that's different is you can fuse monsters together, but you have no idea what the monsters are going to fuse together to be. So you can set down like 3 cards, 2 of them might fuse together, and then 1 might just replace the fused card from earlier because those 2 new cards are not compatible as a fusion. And you can find a listing of all the fusions online, and it's thousands and thousands of them with no understandable rhyme or reason that I can see outside of like some types work well with each other. But the resulting monster has stats that are completely uninfluenced by the monster before it, or that it was fused to be. Sometimes the numbers are bigger. Sometimes they are maybe just a little bit bigger, sometimes a lot bigger. And so I guess the meta of the game is to try and figure out in your hand what cards are going to fuse together to create monsters that essentially become unstoppable. But that deck is randomly given to you at the start of the game, and it's a different random deck with each new playthrough. And then when you win a match, you're only given one card, and that one card is determined by how well you played that match. But even then, there's a 20 in 2048 chance that you'll get like the strongest card from the S rank, meaning you just have to keep playing and playing and playing and playing and grinding these same duels to get the card drop that you're looking for to create a fusion that might have you win later. It's obtuse and obscene. It's horrible.
I can't imagine a worse kind of hell. That doesn't sound like fun at all.
Yeah, well, you said the 2048, and it made me think of that's the game, right? 2048, where it's all like you combine twos and then the fours and then it just multiplies. And that game's addictive as fuck, and I can really I can lose hours to that game if I'm not careful. Also, if it's a porn.
I'm so glad someone else has experienced
anyway,
that.
So good.
Yeah, you are not alone. And but no, you're like, there's no other word to describe the gameplay here. It is so obtuse, and it is obtuse from the fucking get-go. So I want to hone in on something here. So I started the game, and right away, it's just weird. You have that one fucking guy who's like in a burqa, and so you only see his eyes, and he looks like he's not. I was about to say he looks like he's not human, but I don't think that's a good way of describing this character.
Well, but his skin is like blue. He looks like an alien wearing a burqa, not because of the burqa, but because of the blue skin.
Thank you. Yeah, correct. And he's all like, "Hey, you're not supposed to leave. You should go back." And then it like gives you an option where it's all like, "Leave anyway" versus "keep listening." And I was like, well, I don't know. This guy's making some pretty good points. Maybe I shouldn't leave. And so I just kept listening. And it gives you like that option 3 times. And each time I was like, no, I mean, maybe I should be responsible and go back home. And then it just lets you. And I found out later that if you try to leave, he'll like challenge you and be all like, well, actually, let's play for it. I trained you. And it's like kind of a chance to learn the game. But I didn't do that. And so then I go back. And then, of course, like, you're just hanging out, and, like, the temple gets invaded by, or betrayed by, like, the dark mage of the place, and he's a very Jafar-y looking motherfucker. And then it's like, there's another battle that's going to happen, and the same blue alien burqa man comes back. He's all like, you have to run. I'll handle this guy. And then again, it's all like, do you want to flee or do you want to stay? And I was all like, no, I should probably flee. And then it's all like, go, you need to go. It's like, are you sure you want to flee? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to leave. And so it's like, you don't have to fight that one either. And then you have to fight the Jafar guy. And you enter that. And at this point, like, I've been playing the game like 20 minutes. And I've done jack shit. I have done no gameplay. It is just visual novel shit. And then finally, it's all like, all right, choose your deck. And so I start going through. I have absolutely zero idea what any of the names mean, the cards they represent, what any of it means. And so I'm just all like, oh, fuck it. Like, I'll just pick however many I need to pick. But first of all, it doesn't cap you at 5. You can just select all of them. And so that's what I did. All fucking 40 of them. I just selected them. But apparently I selected them with X, which you're not supposed to do. You're supposed to select them with circle, I guess. And literally, the first time I played this, I couldn't even get into a card battle. I was so confused. It wouldn't let me. And then it's all like, I was like, oh, I guess I can switch over to my chest. But it was so nonsensical. I give up. I'm going to watch like a YouTube of this game. And then my wife, of course, picks it up, and she kind of gets into it, realizes that I made it overly complicated for myself, and then she can't beat the first battle either. And then I'm just all in this game. It truly is, guys, it truly is the Dark Souls of video game simulated card games.
No, this time I beg to differ. We can't make that joke with this one. It's just sometimes it's just bad. But that's so funny that you said that you didn't really do much in this game, because I feel like you still did more than I did, because I followed a similar path in the beginning where I spoke to the guy and it's all like, hey, do you want to leave or do you want to stay? And I'm all like, I think I better stay. And then he gives you that option again. And that time I actually left, and then I went somewhere else, and then I ran into the like past like Egyptian version of Taya from the anime, and she's like, "Oh, you're here now. You want to duel?" And I'm like, "Actually, not really." So then I restarted the game, and I'm like, maybe I'm supposed to stick with that guy. So I stuck with that guy, and then I did the tutorial learning how to do the battle, and I was confused because you do have like this starter deck, and I'm like, "Oh, can you edit it at all?" And you can't. These are the cards you get, and it's like a deck of 40, and 37 of them are monster cards, and only 3 of them are trap or magic cards. So I'm like, maybe I'm doing something. Maybe I'm supposed to be like actually building a deck in a deck builder game, but this game doesn't let you build its deck, at least not in the beginning. So a lot of the times I'm just summoning monsters every single turn, and of course my monsters are stronger than their monsters, so I'm always just taking down their defenses and taking down their life points. And then it came to a point where all 5 of my monster slots were filled with monsters, but I didn't know of this fusion mechanic, so none of them ever really fused. And then I was like, okay, well, if my field is full of monsters, maybe I can just skip my turn. And I don't know if there is a skip your turn option because I didn't find it. So I'm like, I guess I will just summon a monster to replace a weaker monster. And I didn't feel good doing that every turn that I was, fucking dominant, because I was just like, I feel like there's a way that I should have the option to just not fucking do anything. And then this happened by like my second like battle in the game, and that's where I was like, I'm done. I think this is everything I got out of the game. This isn't the Yu-Gi-Oh I know and love, and I'm
And Jasmine told me too, it's like, if you're obviously losing your battle or your duel, if you're just obviously not going to win, you can't leave. You can't quit. You can't give up. You just have to keep going.
And it becomes pretty obvious when you're going to lose, because there's like, the other person can just play their strongest monster up front, and since you can only put one monster down at a time, they can just wipe the floor with you. And the other weird thing is you as the player always move first, which means that you can't attack your first turn. You can only lay out essentially a defensive monster. And so if you don't have anything in your card or anything that can fuse, then you put out the one monster, and then your opponent can just play the strongest card in the game and then immediately wipe out your monster.
God.
And then you can only play one. And I think you can only play a monster or a magic card. I don't think you can play 2.
Oh.
And so you can just put out one more monster, and then they put out a second monster. The first one kills you, and then the second one attacks you directly, and then the match is over. There is no coming back, except for one magic card wipes out all monsters on the opposing field. And that's basically the only card that can bring everything back to a point of being on an even playing field. But before that happens, or if you don't have that magic card at all, because it may not be in your deck and you may never get it from a drop. I was lucky in that I did start the game with it, and there was one match I got into where I used it and was able to win but wouldn't have otherwise. What I did when playing through, and just a peek behind the curtain, I do a lot of research before I start playing the game, so I sort of know what to expect going in. And so I watched several videos about the back-end portion of the game, so about the RNG and the speedrunning community, which we'll get to in a bit here, which set up my expectations so I kind of knew what I was getting into with this specific rule set. But even then, I would just sit there and save scum. I'd just hit F1 on the emulator.
That's how you do it.
And just keep mixing cards until I got a mix that created a strong monster. But it was just F3, F3, F3. And if you watch through the footage, Cameron, you're going to see a lot of jump cuts of
man.
Just me seeing the monster and going, nope, can't use that one. Nope, that one didn't fuse into anything. Nope, can't use that one. And it tricks you that when you start the game, you're back in time in Egypt, and you can go to like a duel center, and where I got stuck was not advancing the plot too far. I couldn't figure out how to advance the plot. I was just playing like training matches against randos in Egypt for like an hour and a half, and there's like Egypt versions of all the folks in the future. So there's Egypt Joey and Egypt Taya, and then Egypt Kaiba, who is one of the antagonists who then storms the palace later on. And so I would just play them, and those battles are easy because they don't fuse anything. And so I was like, oh, this game's kind of fun. I keep winning. I'm not even really trying, but I'm winning. And then the Jafar-looking motherfucker you have to lose to. There is no way to beat him, apparently, I think. Or even if you win against him, it doesn't change the plot. And then you shoot forward in time to a card tournament with like modern-day Yugi and stuff. And that's when shit gets knocked into 12th gear, and they actually start playing the game. And if you don't know all of the combinations or don't have a good set of random drops from Egypt time, because it's the same deck that Prince Adam has in Egypt that you have now, then you're right fucked and you can't keep playing the game, which is what happened to me. I essentially got soft locked because I didn't have combinations or cards that could feasibly defeat the opponents. And I was like, well, I don't want to play anymore. And so I stopped.
Fun, I guess, while it lasts.
There's not really anything else to say about the game. You go through those visual novel portions. RNG sort of determines whether you win or not, and there's a bit of strategy with some of the card drops and knowing, like, this is going to make the one lightning dragon that I can actually win these early matches with. But by the time you get to the end, there's a portion where it's a string of 7 fights that you can't lose any of them, or else you get shot back to the first fight. Like, this is the end bit of the game. And because so much is determined by RNG, the opponent could put out fucking Exodia and you're just done, you know? And I really, with this one, I really tried to think maybe there's something fun going on here. Maybe there's a way you can justify some of these choices. And I just can't. It just sucks.
I mean, again, like, not to complain about this every episode, but I'm going to complain about it every episode, is I can't handle a game that does what Kingdom Hearts 3 does and just strips you of any control. Like, I just could not believe that it took me, like, nearly half an hour to actually, like, play any element of the game. That's just egregious, you know.
God, I don't even think I stuck with it. I don't even think I stuck with it that long. I like I said, I only did like maybe 2 battles, and now after hearing both of your experiences with it, I didn't even get to a part where it got challenging, where they like destroyed me. And so like, I tapped out super early. Like I was even like winning a ton, and that still wasn't fun enough for me.
When it speaks to how obtuse it is that we all had different problems with the progression, where, like, Jacob, you progressed too quickly and couldn't figure out how to even learn the basics of the game, and I was stuck in the basics for, like, an hour. And I kept going to other locations there's, like, a little mini-map that you start on, which looks okay. It's got, like, the 5 Egyptian locations, the town square and the card shop. And I kept going between them, and I was like, is there something I'm supposed to be doing? You know, like,
yeah, it just kind of throws you out
this
there.
Along.
I also love like what this posits lore wise, where it's all like, since ancient Egypt and the modern day, the one building structure in a community that remains consistent is, of all things, the card shop.
There's other bits we didn't touch on as far as the card game goes. You can change the terrain with some magic items. You can change the star sign on cards when you put them out. Like, it gives you a choice of either like Aries or Virgo, which I guess affects type damage in some way that, again, is not explained in game. I did read the little manual, like there's a scan of the manual online, which kind of explains some of the strengths and weaknesses and type differences. But when you're talking about making combinations of cards that the power level is a difference of like 1,500 or even 2,000, the typing difference doesn't really matter. And so there's these ancillary systems that are happening that are useless and poorly explained, and it's just another way the game is throwing out like a needless kind of complexity to what could have been a reasonably fun card game with, I feel like, just a bit more development time or a bit more forethought. It's hard to think that anyone sat down and played this during development and was like, yep, this seems about right.
And also, I want to throw this out there. I'm pretty sure in some of the visual novel elements that the sound for it, which I like the music. The music I was able to kind of get on board. Simple though it is.
The Egypt music is good. When you get further in the game, it's really bad.
Okay, well, the Egypt music's what I got. But what it seemed like is that they did not loop the tracks. So the song would play through, but you wouldn't necessarily be done with the conversation you were in. Like, the music was cued with the conversation, but the conversation could take a minute to get through, depending on your own like read speed. But then the music would just at one point stop, like the track was over. And I was all like, well, now it's just really awkward and super uncomfortable. And I'm also not a slow reader. And so I was reading it as it came by and moving on to the next one. And it still ended early. So I thought, like, this, oh God, this... It's just like putting on a really uncomfortable shirt. You know, I just really hated the feeling.
You get that with CD quality audio on PS1 games sometimes, but I feel like it's justified by the fact that it's CD quality. Like, they're playing a real track, and because it's a real track, it can't naturally loop. But these don't sound like fully produced songs. It still sounds like MIDI music.
Yeah.
And it's usually overlaid over like 2D backdrops, so you can kind of mistake yourself for playing a Super Nintendo game during the visual novel portions, and then the track loops, and that is a bit awkward. Did any of you ever press the square button when attacking a monster to see the animation play out?
There's an animation that plays out? No.
So if you select the attack with square instead of with X or circle, then it takes you to a different screen, which it takes forever to load into, and two like kind of low poly 3D models of the monsters play out canned animations to attack one another.
Oh, no.
And I did it once because I was like, well, I'll do this because I'm recording the footage. I'll do this to make it look more dynamic. But it took so long that I was like, I'm never doing this again.
So I also wanted to share. So I discussed that I had like difficulty just like getting to the actual like building a deck, using it, playing the game. And it was late. I was frustrated. And so I thought to myself, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do what I do every time I have a question. I'm going to use ChatGPT. And so I go to ChatGPT and I type in, how do I build a deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories? And I press enter, and then it's like I turn away to talk to Jasmine, talk to my wife, and just basically be all like, man, this game's ridiculous. I just had to turn to ChatGPT. And then she is watching some like SpongeBob anime thing on YouTube, and she's like, it was actually pretty good. She showed me a little bit of it. It was really funny. I'll link it to you guys. But we talk about that, and then I go back to my phone, and it is still loading the text for the question. Like, it's been typing the entire time, like generating the answer, and it's still going. And I'm all like, what? It's that complicated? Am I gonna have to read a fucking book to understand the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories? And yeah, you do. The whole thing, it broke down understanding the basics, deck building strategies, advanced tips, building a powerful deck, final notes, and then I finally had to be like, I don't need tips. I need to know how to play the game. To which its next sentence was, I see you're looking for the basic instructions on how to access and manage a deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories. And I thought, thank you. Yes, don't give me this gamer shit. I need the basics. It wasn't helpful, though, even then.
You're telling me you were let down by something created by AI? How surprising.
AI taught me how to edit this podcast, Tyler. So.
Oh, God. Oh, no. Are you falling in love with the AI that's teaching you how to edit the podcast, like in the movie Her?
Yeah. We're planning to move to Mexico together. That's what I was talking about earlier.
Oh, so not with Jasmine, with your AI. No. Jasmine's going to stay here and work on her book. You're going to go to Mexico.
Jasmine and I have been separated for years. I named the AI Jasmine.
Oh, you thought no, the computer. Come on, guys.
Who do you think I got married to?
So, an interesting aspect of this game, and we don't talk a lot about like fandoms or community aspects of the games. That just hasn't really been in our wheelhouse. We've been more kind of creator focused for the majority of the episodes prior to this. But the speedrunning community around this game in particular, to me, is really fascinating. And a lot of the information I'm taking this from is from a video called The Ultimate Roulette of Speedrunning by YouTuber The Rixer. That's THA Rixer, RIXER. So if you want to learn a bit more about the speedrunning community, go watch that. It was genuinely a fascinating half hour. But the speedrunning community fits perfectly thematically within the property itself because it's about 85%, and maybe more so than 85%, based on luck. See, statistically, there's a pretty specific combination of monsters that you need to defeat some enemies, as we mentioned. And even then, sometimes the enemies will come out swinging so hard that you literally can't recover. And since you can only play one card at a time, and because the player always puts a card out first, that means the enemy always attacks first. Again, we've talked about all this. So the speedrunning group is like a giant gamble. There's been runs as low as a few hours, but some runs as long as 13.
Holy shit.
Trying to race the game usually just results in people quitting. Like if you look at the post-game or competition stats, you'll see like 3 hours, 550, and then a bunch of DNFs. Since the control is mostly out of the player's hands, it's a game just about chance, and while there's some skill involved in getting the right cards all together after the trial and error portions of finding good combinations, because of the length of time it takes to get those cards, and the fact that an enemy near the end of a 7 boss rush can wipe the floor with you with no chance of recourse, the game has gotten a reputation as being difficult or just bullshit. But what's funny is there's a big community around it. Like,
I would have never guessed.
In relative kind of niche terms, I don't think we're talking about the number of people who are watching, I don't know, Overwatch or other kind of esports activities. But there's a little community that gets really hype when they watch that results screen and see the one card that they want. I was watching a guy who was doing a speed run on Twitch, and he just goes like, "Let's fucking go!" after he sees just, Blue Eyes White Dragon show up at the bottom.
That's so wild. I feel like it's even pretty niche within the speedrunning community, too.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't willingly put myself in this situation because you could be having the best run of your life and then, like you said, get fucking destroyed in that 7 boss rush. Like, why would you do this to yourself?
But you have to believe in the heart of the cards.
I guess that's the difference between us and them. They really believe in the heart of the cards.
But it's why I find it kind of thematically relevant. We were talking earlier about that idea of, like, making the intangible feeling of the thrill of drawing the card that you wanted, even in just, like, a simple game of poker, that kind of rush of, like, yes, now I see the path to victory. It's like that, but on this huge, potentially multi-hour timeline of this virtual game that actively hates you. And so when you're overcoming it purely by chance, it's that gamble rush.
Yeah, that like giant like dopamine rush you get. It's such a huge gamble too. That okay, I'm not gonna lie. I can kind of understand it because it probably feels so fucking good when you do pull that card that you've been waiting for like 7 hours. It probably feels fantastic, and you're gonna chase that high for the rest of your life.
The second we end this podcast, Cameron's gonna start speedrunning this game.
I'm gonna hit you guys up in like 2 days and be like, guys, I got the Dark Magician. You don't even fucking know.
Unfortunately, Cameron will not be joining us on future podcasts. He is too busy being a professional Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories speedrunner.
Cut to footage of me just like clicking my mouse or clicking on the controller like people that sit at slot machines or pachinko machines.
just eyes beat red, having not blinked for like 4 hours.
My skin actually turns blue, and then I start wearing a burqa.
That was you!
It was me the whole time!
As we try and convince Kameron not to make those decisions with his life, we're going to take a brief break, and then we'll be right back with the story of this game. So we'll go over the story of this game. We sort of gone over it, and there's also not that much to it. It takes place over 2 timelines. There's ancient Egypt and present day. It begins with Prince Atum sneaking out of the well, he might not sneak out because he might just sit there and listen to what this guy has to say. But it begins with the prince either listening to his advisor or sneaking out of the royal Egyptian palace 5,000 years ago to play cards. There are characters that look like the modern-day friends and rivals Yugi has now. An evil high priest invades the palace for the Millennium Puzzle, but the prince breaks the puzzle, which seals himself inside it for 5,000 years. We then cut back to Yugi in the present time, and his friends and him are doing a card tournament, baby. Yugi solves the puzzle and reobtains the Millennium items from the people he beats in the tournament, and somehow by completing the Millennium Puzzle with all of the pieces just held by random competitors in a card duel 5,000 years later, this sends Atum back in time, but like not all the way back because time is still kind of moved forward. So the high priest has completely taken over. So I guess he goes back, but still but is like 2 weeks forward in time. Time travel doesn't make sense. Long story short, Atum finds the Millennium items again, challenges the high priest, who summons a dark entity that Atum also defeats in a card game. And then in shame, I guess that entity returns from whence he came, and Atum ascends to the throne. I love card games, or like in Pokemon, where there's a legitimate threat, an actual villain who is going to do harm or has done harm to people, and you beat not them, but beat them by proxy in a game of some sort. And they just go, oh, I guess I can't take over the world anymore. That 12-year-old beat my dog with his lizard.
Is this not basically the entire premise of the Devil Went Down to Georgia song?
You're right.
Can we make an anime? Can there be an anime version of The Devil Went Down to Georgia? Because that would be fucking sick to watch.
It's called Yu-Gi-Oh! Do you think they have grad school programs in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Universe?
They must.
The Duel Monsters card game?
They have to. There's no way. If there's an entire fucking like conglomerate about Duel Monsters, there has to be like some kind of university.
Yeah, where else do you go if you're a mediocre player at the game, but you want to feel like you know what you're doing?
Like if you suck at Duel Monsters in this universe, you basically are the bottom of the fucking barrel. Like your life does not matter in this universe. You're either good at the game or you're just fucked.
Meanwhile, there's a character who's just like, I went to school for 16 years to become a doctor, and apparently I can't get a fucking mortgage. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, I tried to apply for one, but I had to play the game of Duel Monsters against them, and I fucking lost. So they were like, "Nope, you can't do that."
All job interviews in this universe are done solely with the Duel Monsters card game.
You want to graduate,
and you're like,
you want to graduate with a degree. It's like, it's not your final exam. It's a fucking game of Duel Monsters against the professor. If you lose against that, you don't get your diploma.
For my thesis, I deployed the Exodia method.
What's the Tyler? What is it that said in the theme song, in the American theme song for it? Is it it's duel time?
It's time to duel.
It's time to duel.
It would be great, yeah, to go through like an entire job interview, and the guy stands up at the very end and it's like, "Hey, this was a really great interview. I like the cut of your jib. Really like to offer you the job, but before we do, it's time to duel."
The fucking lights go out.
All
and
the
starts
walls
getting
of
dark.
the interview room catch on fire. You get raised up on 2 platforms.
The fucking like life point counter just appears in front of you. Just do.
The job interviewer rips his shirt off. He's like a hulked out old man. He's like, "This is my true form." Pulls out the card holders on
the
his
fucking
wrists.
dual disc.
Yeah. And then at the end of it, the 2 lower down, and he goes, "Thank you very much for coming in. We'll be in touch."
Don't call us, we'll call you.
He didn't even get me below 6,000 life points. Sharon, I don't think we can bring him on, even if he is your nephew.
He was a third-rate duelist with a fourth-rate deck.
We've got a visuals and audio section here. We've kind of gone over it. It's 2D visual novel segments. There's some rudimentary 3D in the maps, and the music, I do like the Egypt battle theme, I think is really good. But then I tried listening to the OST, and the farther you get into it, it's not great. It's not fun to listen to. It was quite bad. Sorry, guys.
But I guess the one takeaway here is that the composers later worked on the Metal Gear series.
Yeah, well, I guess they would have been working kind of in tandem if this game came out sort of around the time of the first Metal Gear. So it's 3 composers, Naoko Ishii, Hiroshi Tanabe, who's also known as Nebayan, and Wachiro Ozaki. So those last 2 worked on MGS, and Ozaki is the big composer on the Pro Evolution Soccer series, which is another big Konami sports series. But there's not too much else to note with them. So I do wonder if Yu-Gi-Oh! Just got their disposed of MGS tracks. They were like, this isn't good enough for MGS, just send it down the tube to those people working in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Game development mines in the basement.
Yeah, put it in the modern day sections. They should work there.
Now, Shots, you always have the fun game of having us guess what movie came out around the time of the game's release. I have a question. How many Yu-Gi-Oh! Games do you guys think there are? Separate, distinct Yu-Gi-Oh! Video games.
I feel like I heard something about there being 7 other games in development, or maybe even the PS2 era. And so I'm going to guess 11. I think that there are 11 total Yu-Gi-Oh! Games.
Total Yu-Gi-Oh! Games up till right now.
Well, by asking me that, you're making me really second guess it. Okay. All right. 13, final answer. 13 up until now. Total
Kameron?
Yu-Gi-Oh!
I'm gonna say somewhere around 30. I'm gonna be specific. I'm gonna say 31.
59.
Jesus fucking Christ!
There are 59 Yu-Gi-Oh! games.
There are 59 Yu-Gi-Oh! Video games released since 1998, I think. So this core team would go on to work on the next console set of Yu-Gi-Oh! Games, primarily something called Duelist of the Roses, which is a direct sequel to Forbidden Memories. Much of the team would also help for the Falsebound Kingdom for the GameCube and the Dawn of Destiny for the Xbox. For those of you counting, that's one console exclusive for each of the big 3 at the time. So, Shots, they probably had 11 or 13 by like 2002.
That's
Since
insane.
1998, there have only been 4 years that don't have a Yu-Gi-Oh! Release at all. 2012, 2018, 2020, and 2023. And 2 of those probably would have had games if not for COVID. And 2023 can sort of be explained away by the fact that they're doing free-to-play stuff with regular updates, so the game as a live service continued on. There have constantly been new Yu-Gi-Oh! Video games coming out.
Wow.
I should have thought with the what is it, the 63rd highest grossing franchise, I should have thought that it was higher than 13, so fair.
They churn them out. The anime has been running in several different forms, also basically constantly since, mostly produced by Studio Gallop until 2020, when production was handed over to Studio Bridge. I'm not sure why it got shifted over. The series are often distinguished by different names like Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, or Zexal, or Vrains, which is specifically all caps, like the word trains, but with a V instead. And y'all, I'm going to be honest, I just don't have the spoons to look any further into any of these other titles. It doesn't seem like it's a direct continuation. The manga is not involved in it at all. It's just anime for anime's sake.
Yeah, there's like different protagonists for like the different like subtitles of Yu-Gi-Oh! So like GX has a different protagonist. There's one, I think it's called, I'm just pulling it up, but I think there's one called there we go, Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc V, and they're playing duel monsters on fucking motorcycles.
What?
Yeah, it's fucking dope.
That's cool.
Highly
I'm
irresponsible.
gonna watch it. Fuck
Yeah,
it.
I mean, if I might come back later because I don't know if Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc V. They play these games on motorcycles, and it sounds amazing.
Before we get into the conclusion and the end of the manga, it's time for the recommendation corner.
Recommendation corner.
So there are a few free-to-play Yu-Gi-Oh! Games for modern consoles, most recently Master Duel, which you can get on the Switch, PC, Android, etc. If you want a Yu-Gi-Oh! Game at this point, that's probably your safest bet, because only Duelist of the Roses and the Game Boy titles use this weird rule set, and all of us hate this weird rule set, so you might as well just play the real thing at this point. But I'm going to recommend a game called Inscription.
Yes.
It's a deck builder with a dark storyline, but also very fun and interesting mechanics. Cameron, you should talk more about Inscription. You like it as well.
I do. It's one of my favorite games, but also it's like you can't say too much about it. It's one of those games where it's best to go in completely blind. But the premise is basically you wake up, you're trapped in a cabin, and there's a mysterious opponent on like the other side of this table that you wake up on at, and he just wants to play a game of cards with you. And it's like one of those like deck builder battler cards. You summon different types of little animals by sacrificing weaker animals, and it just gets darker and more twisted as the game goes on, and there's just so much more beneath the surface. It's, again, best to go in blind, but highly suggest Inscription for those who haven't yet.
And it's all about card positioning, card numbering, defense versus attack. So it's a lot of those same kind of mechanics, but used very purposefully. There's not the gotcha mechanics of what cards you're collecting. Everything is very intentional.
Yeah.
And it is going to seem like a rogue type, and it's got rogue aspects at first where there is death that sends you back to the beginning of a run, but so much carries over on each run, and it tells a continuous storyline. Again, I'm being very careful with what I reveal.
Yeah.
Again, go in blind, but however you want to play it, play it. I think it's on PS Plus right now. I cannot stress enough how good Inscription
it's also on
is.
PC if you guys are play on PC.
It maybe goes a smidge too long, is my only criticism.
I loved every minute of this game.
But I think it might just be me saying that. It's really good.
Yours is not yours is not an uncommon critique of that game.
I've never played it, so I will put it on my list, maybe for an October game.
Perfect.
Now, I can't attest to any really great deck builder games. That's not really my genre of choice or force. I think, generally speaking, I would prefer never mind. But one thing I will say, what it kind of reminds me of is the game Darkest Dungeon.
Oh, right on.
Which is a game that I really love. It's not so much, I mean, it is a turn-based battler, but I do feel like there's a bit of, it's not literal deck building with a card, but the way that you're building your team, how you manage them. I don't know if you guys have played it, but one of the great mechanics in that game is you basically play as the lord of an estate, and you've got this dungeon, a very sort of Lovecraftian dungeon in your home where like this very powerful treasure is, and you want to get to it, but to go in there is a fool's errand. So you basically, being wealthy, hire different travelers to come in and do it. You have warriors, you have archers, rogues, magicians, houndsmasters, a lot of variety in there. And they come in, you use them, but the further they venture into the darkest dungeon, the more like crazy they get. Like, it has an impact on them. It wears them down. They get horrified. And when they're done with a particular run, which ideally you finish, whatever sort of like insanity that they're experiencing, you need to send them to places in the community like the Sept in order to like pray to God, if that helps them. Or maybe they are not a believer and you need to send them to the bar and just get them wicked drunk, and that's how they do it. Or gambling, yada 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 yada. And then they come back, you send them back in, and if they're not fully healed, or even if they are, if they die, they're dead for good, and all the leveling you did with them is over, and you have to hire a new traveler to hopefully fill that same niche. And so there is a lot of management of your party. And if you think of it as, if it were a card game, I think it would have largely the exact same mechanics. So that would be my recommendation.
And then for physical card games, obviously the Yu-Gi-Oh card game is still running. You can still pick that up and booster cards and whatever. I find the booster packs to be very expensive and very stressful. I know there's folks who love things like Magic the Gathering, but I could never get into it because it was so cost prohibitive. So I'll recommend 2 physical games. One's called Star Realms and the other is called Cthulhu Realms. It's got a lot of the same play mechanically as Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic or whatever, but it's just one standard deck that you can split with the other person. Sometimes I think you even draw from the same deck. Star Realms has a bunch of expansions, but it's not like random booster packs. You know what's in it. It expands the existing rule set, or you can swap some cards out. My wife and I have loved playing Star Realms. We haven't picked it up in a while, but sometimes if we'd go to like a coffee shop or something, we'd just bring that deck along and just have a little Star Realms match with our coffee. So I'll shout that one out. Nice. If you want a physical replacement that is less expensive than trying to get into Yu-Gi-Oh at this point.
Just if we want to go back to playing an old card game, video game with the old mechanics, the Pokemon trading card game for the Game Boy, which you can easily play if you have a Switch Online account.
It's so good.
It's actually really good, and it probably has the best soundtrack of any Game Boy game, at least in my opinion. The music every song is such a banger.
So to wrap up, the manga ended its run way back in 2004. The anime series following Duel Monsters arcs are unrelated to the manga and the original creations. So Kazuki Takahashi has really no involvement in the series following 2004. And what's interesting is he didn't publish any big series after this either. He would release a few one-shots and a serialized manga called The Comic in 2018, but tragically passed away in 2022. According to reports, Takahashi drowned the afternoon of July 4th off the coast of Nago, Okinawa, while attempting to rescue 3 other snorkelers who were caught in a rip current. The other 3 were later rescued by an American military officer stationed at Okinawa, Major Robert Bourgeau. And the act, I think, speaks to Takahashi's character, who seems to have been regarded by everyone who worked with him as a genuinely nice, down-to-earth guy who just had a love of games. His work on Yu-Gi-Oh! Was inspired by a desire to share that love with his readers, who he assumed to be young folks also lost in life, maybe belittled by their teachers and looking for hobbies and joy in the harsh realities that they occupy. The ultimate positive message that Takahashi wanted to impart, as he says in an interview with Shonen Jump, is that each person has a strong hidden part within themselves, and that when exposed to hardship, this human potential can emerge so long as that person believes in themselves and in their friends. And in his passing, Takahashi seems to embody this very message that he wanted to pass on to his reader. So, we dedicate this episode to you, Takahashi-san, and thank you for the impact that you've had on so many childhoods for the better. May you rest in peace. Sorry that this game sucks. Wah, wah, wah.
This has we sure this is no reflection on you, Takahashi-san.
Yeah, this you don't carry this one with you to the grave.
He had no involvement.
There we go.
He just gets up to heaven and God's looking over and he's like, forbidden memories, huh? And Takahashi's like, no, it wasn't me.
I'm pretty sure that he got up to heaven and God looked at him and he said, time to duel.
You want to get into heaven? You have to beat me at Duel Monsters.
Thank you once again for joining us for another episode of Mics and Memory Cards. This episode was hosted by the 3 of us, Tyler, Jacob, and Cameron. It was written by Tyler, edited by me, and social media by Kameron. You can find us online on Instagram and Twitter at Mics and Memory Cards. In the meantime, please do not forget to hit that follow button and give us a rating if you don't mind. And in the meantime, we'll see you next week when we go over a wonderful game that might be best described as stunning purple. In the meantime, I'm Jacob.
I'm Tyler.
And I'm Kameron.
And you've been listening to Mics and Memory Cards.